Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I know it's late. It's late in the day. It's late in the conference. Our brains are probably on overload, and so hopefully this will be interesting to you. So this is, I used to call it toward a role-based access control, attribute-based control discussion, but that's too many words, so now I just call it toward ABAC. And so, my name is Sean McKinney. I work for Simus. Simus is the commercial sponsor of Open LDAP. Open LDAP is an open source product released under the Berkeley license, which is even more permissive than the Apache license. And so we package that product into a product for the various distributions and support for our customers. That is my day job. And then I moonlight with Apache Directory. As was said, I'm on the PMC. And I used to be on the Open LDAP engineering team. And yeah. So our agenda, let me get this lined up. So we're going to talk about access control, okay? And a couple of flavors of it. And then we're going to look at an implementation of it, which is called Apache Fortress. And as I am the founder and maintainer of that, and that is a role-based access control implementation, and we'll kind of look at that a little bit. And then I'll show you a couple of demos. I'll show you one of traditional RBAC, doing fine grain, and then we'll sprinkle some attributes in it. Okay, so if that's okay with everybody. So, role-based access control, and I've been doing this talk for many, many years. And I always am kind of surprised that people don't understand just how rigid of a standard it is. Okay, it is an ANSI standard, and then these three gentlemen here are really the framers of it. Richard Kuhn, David Ferraiolo, and Robbie Sandu. We're talking about a specification. Okay, and this specification has a history, has a long history. And it goes back even to the 80s. And in the 80s, really the methodology that was in use was called DAC, Discretionary Access Control. And that was something that was used by the Department of Defense, and it was adopted by enterprises, and it didn't really work. And so then they, as things go, the industry evolved. And the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, spearheaded that. Okay, and so it goes all the way back to say '92, where it was starting to become formalized, and then basically what I just said was it was lacking integrity, which is that up until then there really wasn't any authorization that was working for enterprises, and so RBAC was to fill the gap. So it really started getting interesting to me was after around 2000, and that's about when I started looking at it, was in 2000. And I worked for a large financial services company, and we were looking to roll out an authorization solution to all of our projects, and what methodologies, we're looking at the various methodologies that we could use, and we stumbled upon RBAC, and we really started digging into it. And so how's this supposed to work? How is an RBAC system supposed to work? And it was really, I couldn't believe my luck, because about that time they drafted a formal specification, and it was written in a language called Z, and Z is implementation agnostic, and it really described exactly what a role-based access control system is supposed to do. And so, today, really the specification 359 was kind of solidified in 2012. It's pretty much done. And then there is a companion spec called Insights 494, which brings in what they call policy enhanced and attribute modifiers. Okay, so now we're starting to kind of head into an ABAC kind of a thing. So just put that in your back pocket, and we'll get to it in a bit. So what is role-based access control specifically? Okay. And so there is a very formal model, and this diagram is sort of the classic model you'll see. and it has the entities and their relationships. But it's 4 broad areas. Okay, RBAC 0 is referred to as the core, and that is users, roles, permissions, and most important, sessions. Okay, and session is we're going to get to that, so put that in your back pocket. Okay, and so then you have hierarchical roles, which is useful but not really always done, and that's more kind of an administrative trick. It's a way of sort of making it easier to classify when you're getting into role engineering. And then you have this separation of duties for RBAC 2, static, and RBAC 3 is dynamic. And what is that? That's kind of where you have this sort of constraint between roles. There's a relationship. And so static would be, hey, you can be a manager or you can be an administrator. You can never be both at the same time. And the policy mechanism won't ever allow that to happen at administration time. Now, why would that be? For some toxic combination of those 2 roles, it could be that there's too much power or whatever. And then dynamic separation duties, which is RBAC 3, that's a little more subtle. It's that, yeah, you can be assigned both roles. You can be a manager and administrator, but you can't be both at the same time. That's dynamic separation duties. Those 4 things make up Insights 359. Okay, so we can go into the object model. It's a very refined and specific object model. And I'm not going to bore you with all that. Just point to that session again, okay? That session is very important. Okay, so the specification, the functional specifications include a functional model. What is that? That's the APIs. That's the shape of the APIs. It actually defines the APIs. And so you have 3 categories. You've got admin, that's administrative. How do you provision the policy? How do you add a role? How do you delete a role? How do you add a user? How do you assign a role? How do you grant permission? All that stuff. Review is interrogation. How do you know what roles somebody has? How do you know? And really where it starts to get pretty powerful is you say, well, who has this permission right here? Okay, that's a pretty important function. Me as a system implementer, I was not a policy expert, so I had no idea what all kinds of things should be done, and so it really helped to have a specification as a blueprint, and then so I implemented it, and then later when we started to roll it out, we got to find out how useful it was, because people were like, oh, can you do this? And we said, oh yeah, we got an API for that, and that's really kind of nice. And then the third one, that's what people really usually think of when they think of access control, and that's the runtime. Okay, authentication, authorization, can you do this, can you do that? Okay, but RBAC spec encompasses all 3 of those. I'm not going to take you through that, but this tells you the system APIs in a nutshell. And I suspect most of you are already familiar with these kinds of things. Okay, so this eye chart is Apache Fortress. Again, that's that project that I founded and I maintain, and that is an implementation of role-based access control, Insights 359. It fully implements it. So what does it do? So think of it in terms of it's not it's not an application. It's something applications use. So and like my first back when I was working for a big company, we implemented an RBAC solution, and then any application team that needed one, they could use ours. They embed it into probably a web app. Could be some kind of back-end thing. And then it was a way of sort of standardizing a solution across not only our projects, but our customers. Okay, but Fortress has, again, it's written in Java. It has a set of APIs that's in the core. And then there is a RESTful interface, and there is a web interface that for like an admin GUI or something. Any questions to this point? Okay, so this eye chart is the demo that I will show you. And it started out as a way of sort of demonstrating end-to-end security in a web app. And this was a traditional web app. I've been doing this, I wrote this app like over 10 years ago. And so, it's all about securing all the endpoints, TLS everywhere, just every single. So the demo really takes you soup to nuts in a tutorial, front to back. We're not interested in all that today. We're just interested in RBAC. So I wanted to kind of pull it up just to show you an RBAC sort of use case, a traditional RBAC use case. If you are interested in that, all these things that I'm showing you, like this one's in my public GitHub account, if you want to try it out. Okay, so the demo is, again, it's a traditional RBAC sort of contrived example of doing fine-grained authorization. It has, it's very simple, it has 3 pages, page 1, page 2, page 3. There's 3 customers. It actually has a database that I'm locking down. And then we're securing, there's 9 roles. So for every page to customer combination, we create a role. Okay, so in order to hit page 1 for customer 1, 2, 3, you have to activate the page 1, 1, 2, 3. And then I put a dynamic constraint between all those roles. You can only activate one at a time. Okay, so you get a truth table like this, where based on these combinations, you can do different things. And so let's just try this real quick. And so I am not a GUI developer. I specialize in ugly GUIs. And so this is one of them. So I'm going to log in as user 1, 1, 2, 3, which means I can hit page 1 for customer 1, 2, 3. And actually, I'm just going to do user 1. Okay, so because this is user 1, they actually have access only to 1 page. So this app will only give links to pages that they have a role for or that they've been assigned to. So they can only hit page 1. And so we don't have any buttons yet because this user has not activated a role yet. So they would have, in order to be able to interact with any of the data, they'd have to activate, say, page 1, 1, 2, 3. So this is this session that I was talking about. They don't have a role in the session. We're going to put a role in the session. We activate that role. Now, page, can you see those buttons that have been popped up down there? Let me pull this up a little bit. You can see that, yeah, now there's buttons. And then so if they try to do, say, 4, 5, 6 data, and they did a search on it or something, it wouldn't let them do it because they don't have the role for that. So that's the kind of use case we got going on here. But if they did they got the role for 1, 2, 3, and then they can do a search, and then you can see that it pulled back the data for it. So that's just a classic role-based access control use case for if you want to do fine-grained authorization using classic RBAC, it's going to look something like that. Okay, so now we're getting into sort of what this talks, what we're trying to get to. So I already mentioned before that in that particular app there was 9 roles. Okay, and so we're getting into really what the problem with RBAC is. And so, it really comes down to one word, it's called context. As soon as you want to add context into the decision, you start to run into a problem. Now, I've been a subject matter expert in security for a long time. I've seen applications that have 8,000 to 9,000 roles. Okay, if you got 8,000 or 9,000 roles, you've done something wrong. Okay, you're not helping anything. Okay, RBAC's not helping. So you're on the wrong track. And so, and really what you have is you have this sort of problem where you have the number of roles times the number of pages. So every time you introduce a new context, you got to have a new role. So, like we have here. And so if you only have, say, 3 pages and maybe 3 customers, you got 9 roles. 9 roles, that's okay. But, a financial institution is probably going to have more than 3 customers. And so you can very quickly get into a problem where your roles explode, right? And that's the classic sort of anti-pattern for RBAC is that, role explosion. It's a well-known problem, nothing new, everybody knows about it. Okay, there's no secret here. Okay, so what do we do about that? Okay, that's our problem. We got ABAC. Okay, so I'm not going to read that to you. Who here is familiar with ABAC? Okay, so with a role-based model, you've got really the role is the thing that gets assigned to the user, and then the permissions, which is the operation and the object you're trying to access, is assigned to the role. And so you've got that relationship that really, everything's based on a role in terms of the policy. With attribute-based access control, role is just an attribute. An attribute-based access control system can use a role, but it's just an attribute. And so, and anything can be an attribute. So anything you can imagine can be an attribute. So we used to call it dynamic authorization. This is not a new concern. It's not like all of a sudden we woke up one day and said, oh, we need attributes. Okay, it's been around for as long as I've been here. So, as I said, although the concepts existed for many years, ABAC is considered next generation. It used to be a buzzword. It's been around long enough now that it's just sort of part of the framework. These are old slides. There's plenty of examples of ABAC. What's some examples of ABAC you guys know? Implementations. How about OPA? You heard of OPA? Any other ones?
Cedar.
Cedar. Doesn't Google have one? Yeah, so there's just a lot of them out there. I don't know a lot, but there's many. There's many implementations of ABAC. Okay, so ABAC is more complicated. So you start to introduce these intermediaries that, and really, you like this here, the policy information points. So those attributes, they have to come from somewhere. They have to be introduced into the expression. And so it has to be combined. And so you get into really where your data model is going to be, it's going to be very difficult to define the data model, standard data model with ABAC. Where with RBAC, the data model is very easy to define, it's very simple, it's very easy to understand. So now we're getting into the drawbacks. Okay, so I would say this is my talk, so this is my editorial. Okay, so my read on it, and I would like to root for ABAC. I would love to see an ABAC implementation that actually is based on a specification that has traction. Okay, so it's back to what I started earlier where I was saying, I'm a system implementer. I would love to design an ABAC system that you could use. Where are the specs? Okay, where are the specifications? Because I don't want to invent one. I'm not an expert on the domain. I want people that are experts in the domain to develop a specification. And then me as an implementer, I can just implement it. So these are my drawbacks, and standards and poor traction is why I've never gotten out of the starting block. I've never been able to get past that. This is NIST's example of how you would implement an ABAC solution. You guys ready to get started? Let's go. Okay, anybody ready? How much time? What year do you want it? It's 2024. We could get rolling. Okay, so what now? I don't have that many years before retirement, so I might just give up. Or let's have another look. Let's have another look at RBAC. Is there something we can do? Why, yes, there is. And those framers I was talking about, there's Richard Kuhn right there at the top. But they're talking about this sort of other way of doing it. I'm not going to read that. But what we're talking about is Insight 494, something like a policy enhanced RBAC. Okay, what's that look like? So now we're going to get back to the session. Remember we were talking about that? And it's all about activation step, okay? Again, you're a user, you're assigned these roles. That role has to be activated, okay? When that role is activated, you have an opportunity to introduce attributes there to constrain that activation. And then there's another possibility on the role or permission act. So with the user role activation, we can say something like, hey, that user can only activate the cashier role at store 314. We don't have to have a cashier 314 role. We can just have a cashier role and then introduce a constraint for store 314. That sounds like the same, but it's a little different. We'll get to that in a second. There's another opportunity there in that role and permission activation phase, and that is to say, hey, this action can only be performed on an account with this number. And that's at the permission level. But those are the two places in standard RBAC where you can introduce an RBAC. You can introduce an attribute. So Apache Fortress, which is the implementation that, again, that I work on, has long had, since the very beginning, had the concept of a role activation and constraints on roles. And what we started with was what's called temporal constraints, which is to say you can only activate this role Monday through Friday, from 8 to 5, you're on vacation, you can't activate it during that time. So those kinds of constraints, that's always been there. And then I had somebody I collaborated with out in the field who was working on an Apache Hadoop data lake project. This is probably now been a while, back in 17, I think, who came up to me with an idea. He just found me and he started collaborating on it. It's like, why don't we introduce a new constraint with an attribute modifier? And we started whiteboarding. What would that look like, you know? And this is kind of what we came up with. So again, we're talking about context, okay? So we can store the contextual information of the user on the entries role assignment. So in RBAC, there's already a user to role entity, okay? Because it has to be assigned, so there has to be a relationship there. So it's already there. And so on that entity, we can introduce a constraint. And again, I had temporal constraints already. We can introduce another kind of constraint that we'll call it a user constraint that can be on a role, say teller. So this is actually kind of what that entity looks like. It's just an expression. And so we see it's a teller and it's a constraint type user, and then you got a key value there. And that key value can be anything. Okay? So in this case, we can try an example, location north. So that's core RBAC, what we started out with. And if we introduce these kinds of constraints, what do we look at? We're looking at something like that, which, that's not bad. We haven't messed up the model too much. So, and with everything, when you get all four of the RBAC things, and that's what the new model kind of looks like, conceptually. Okay, so what are the advantages? We have the opportunity to introduce arbitrary attributes into the role activation phase. Only now the role is special in that it can only be activated if this special role can only be activated if those conditions are met. So have we fixed the role explosion problem? We can continue to use our RBAC systems that we know and love, maybe, and they are hopefully simpler to implement and maintain, and there's really no limit to the types of attributes. So I'm asserting that to you as facts. So here's an example. This is a financial institution. We've got the teller, and of course we've got to have a coin washer at a financial institution. That's a very important function, as we all know. And then we're going to constrain it by location. So here are our users. We got Curly, Mo, and Larry. And Curly is a coin washer in the north, and he's a coin washer in the south. He's a teller in the east, and Mo is a coin washer in the east and the south, and a teller in the north, and so on and so forth. So that's our supposed policy. So we could have done it like this if we were just using the old RBAC way where we concatenated the the role at the constraint. And that's kind of the way that people will go down that road when they're not supposed to. I'm saying, no, don't do that. So we want to do it more like this, where you know, we got this role coin washer, and we're going to specify a constraint, call it location. And then we've got another role called teller, we're going to also constrain it by location. So now this is what our assignments would look like. Look like this, where we got Curry, you know, he's a teller, and then he's constrained to the east, and he's a washer in the north, and he's a washer in the south. Does that make sense? So what's that look like under the hood? Fortress is, it uses what's called an LDAP directory as the policy store. LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. It's a specialized kind of database. Everybody know what LDAP is? It's Active Directory is a type of LDAP server. So this is actually, I was using the Apache Directory Studio, which is one of the projects under Apache Directory, to browse Curly's entry. And then here's his attributes. Here's some attributes that correspond with his role assignments. And so you can see here that he's got, you know, this washer role, and he's constrained by south and north, and then the teller role, and he's constrained by the east. So that's actually physically what the data looks like in the directory under Curly's entry. Okay, this is a bit of an eye chart, but I wanted to kind of show you, because again, Fortress is an API, right? So imagine if you are an application developer and you want to use this in your app. What's that API look like? What is it kind of, how would you do that? And so I had to introduce a new entity called role constraint in order to do this. And then in the constraint, that's where you set the actual location of where it's at, right there in this instance. And you can see we're in north. And then there's a little bit of boilerplate there. And then really everything else is the same. You just create the session, and the session decides at runtime whether it's going to activate that role or not. So let's have a demo. I love this picture, you know, that blue screen of death. Was that trigger with the thing that just happened? Everybody had the blue screen of death, you know. It triggers me, you know, I see that, and I just have anxiety right away. But I feel like, Uncle Bill here. Okay, so here's another ugly GUI app that I designed for you. And it's called the Apache Fortress ABAC demo. And this is also in my public GitHub account. It uses Apache Wicked as a web framework. It's just a very simple app. This one's much simpler than the other one. It doesn't have the database and all that other stuff. I was just trying to demonstrate policy with this one. And you can implement the same table that I did before. You know, as far as, you know, 3 pages, how many customers, so on and so forth. And so let's just try it out. All right. Screw it. Trust me, it works. Next steps. So Fortress did it in the user to role activation phase. Like I said, that's kind of nice. We could also do it in the role permission step, and that's even better. So then you can have things like limits. You know, like, hey, you can only do this if the amount is less than $500, or you can do, you know, that kind of thing. So I haven't done it yet because nobody's asked for it. And so until somebody asks me, I'm not going to do it, but I could at any time. Okay, so closing thoughts. Really, my whole thing on RBAC is it doesn't probably solve all your problems. In fact, I wouldn't be standing here if it did. But I would say that every system needs at least RBAC. So So that's kind of one thing that I tell you. Another thing that I think is, ABAC's hard. Yeah, you can do it, but it's not easy. It's not as elegant as RBAC, in my view. And so we do have this stopgap measure between the two, between the sort of easy, you're going to need it, and it's elegant, and the hard, you may not need all of that. You have this kind of middle ground. And that's kind of what I'm shooting for here. That's hopefully I'll convince you of that. And that's it. So there's our project there, Apache Fortress. And those examples, and we'll have these slides published if you want to get to that. And I do have I use Ansible for my day job, so I've created some plays for setting this stuff up. In fact, all the Fortress examples, everything I've shown you, and many more, can be installed via a set of plays. And that's my work. That's published on my work GitLab. And then these examples I just showed you is my own public GitHub account. Is there? And then there's my contact information if you want to get a hold of me. And do we have time for questions? If there are any questions?